If you're digging the chaos of the government shutdown and Republican leadership in Washington and just general chaos of the Trump administration, you're in luck because Republicans there and throughout the country are working on ways to make sure that nobody else ever gets into power again. On Monday, the pardon attorney for the Justice Department, Eagle Ed Martin, announced that Trump had pardoned 77 people who were intimately involved with efforts to overturn the 2020 election on his behalf. Obviously, this is part of a huge permission structure in which Trump and Republicans embolden people who are willing to do the things like what those 77 people did back in 2020. Most of them were fake electors, the people who signed fake documents purporting to hand over electoral college votes to Trump from states like Georgia and Wisconsin. They're frauds. This was fraudulent activity, illegal. Some of them, like 2 women on the list of those who were pardoned on Monday, represent the only Americans in recent years to have actually breached voting machines and election equipment illegally in an attempt to find evidence of fraud. Just as a side note, forget all the noise you hear from the election denial movement about the vulnerability of voting machines, because what they always fail to mention is that the only people to have broken into voting machines in the last few years were their own people down in Coffee County, Georgia. Anyway, all those people are off the hook, sort of. Pardons only deal with federal cases. Some of these people might have been in danger of federal indictment, like Rudy Giuliani, but most of them weren't even under indictment, and if they were, it was state cases. So this is definitely more of a message-sending move from the White House, which is that if you try to overturn an election in my favor, I will have your back. This is all happening as the Department of Justice has effectively become the governmental arm of the election denial movement. Across the country, they are demanding voter registration information, lists of registered voters, and some of their personal information as they construct what some election officials have told me is what they call a national voter file. The DOJ is demanding these voter lists from 30 states. They're suing in like 6 or 7 states. They're going to demand these lists from every state eventually. Anyway, the supposed goal of this is to find undocumented immigrants who are registered to vote, which is an extraordinarily rare occurrence. Because of that extreme rarity of undocumented immigrants being registered to vote, voting rights advocates have lots of concerns about why the Trump administration is constructing this database that in some cases includes information like what party you're registered under or affiliated with, and the last 4 digits of your social security number, and your address, and your driver's license number. As the government has been constructing this database, states led by Republicans have been utilizing it to carry out their own hunts for undocumented immigrants on voter rolls. There's lots of concerns about the effects of that and the false positive that it's probably going to create, purging Americans who are lawfully and rightfully on those lists and kicking them off the rolls. And we already see that happening in one county in Texas, where a Democratic election official looked at the list of people that came from this national voter file, who received notifications in the mail saying, hey, you're an undocumented immigrant, you're not supposed to be registered to vote. And he said that 1/4 of the people on the list from his county who received those notifications had already proved their citizenship. So now we're just straight up disenfranchising actual Americans registered to vote, all under the guise of finding this phantom theory of millions and millions of undocumented immigrants voting in elections. It's just not reality. So that's what the DOJ is up to across the country. In Georgia, meanwhile, it's supposedly investigating, get this, 2020 election fraud in Fulton County. There's a lot going on here, and I have a lot of reporting and some stories that are coming out that explain this in greater detail, but suffice to say for right now that Julie Adams, a Republican who's on the Fulton County Election Board, is almost surely in cahoots with people at the DOJ like Ed Martin as they hunt for 148,000 ballots that they really believe is going to show once and for all that the election in 2020 was stolen from Trump in Atlanta. Here's Julie Adams at a recent Fulton County Election Board meeting.
Asking if we have the ballots from 2020.
As you've been told several times, the ballots are in the possession of the Clerk of Superior Court.
Well, I do want to go on the record that I think with this letter from the DOJ that we should comply, and just want to go on the record that I am not fighting it at all. We need to comply. We need to get all of the questions stopped. But I just want to be on the record that I'm not obstructing anything from the SEB or the Department of Justice.
She's talking about the 148,000 ballots that are in possession of a state court judge which Ed Martin has supposedly demanded. There's a lot of confusing stuff going on there. I will get into that later. Meanwhile, Janelle King, a Republican and Trump supporter on the state election board, is bragging to her folks that she's talking to the DOJ.
I know you guys wrote a letter to the DOJ. Now, I understand you probably can't talk about an open investigation, but will they communicate, Ed Martin, will they communicate with the Board of Elections?
We are hearing. So yes, they're communicating with us. We're aware. We're very aware.
That's Janelle bragging about herself and the two other Republican members of the state election board, how they're communicating with the DOJ on this Fulton County nonsense. Now, her and those two other members have been busy working on Trump's behalf, trying to implement aspects of his executive order on elections from early on in his administration. Janice Johnston proposed banning no excuse absentee voting altogether. She got in a little bit of a back and forth here with the SCB's chairman, John Furbier, who said, well, hey, I don't know, a lot of working people can't take the whole day off if they need to go vote, so maybe they should be able to have access to things like absentee voting, which is another way to say mail-in ballots. Johnston basically said, tough luck. They're going to have to figure out a way to do it.
And then I recently worked for a company that had thousands of people that work 7 days a week. And there are a lot of people out there that work 7 days a week to feed their families and make ends meet, especially now. And restricting their access to absentee voting is not fair to those people. It might be easier for somebody who's rich or somebody who's retired or somebody can take a day off and not lose pay. But when you have to earn $1 every day to feed your family, you can't take a day off to go vote.
Asking someone to find one day out of the year where they can cast a ballot in order to protect their country, I don't think that that's somehow creating a burden.
Well, it creates a burden. It is a sacrifice. You're asking somebody whether to get a paycheck or go vote. That's
well,
the reality
they won't miss
of
a
it.
paycheck. Are they missing a paycheck?
Mr. Chair, I believe the state of Georgia requires employers to provide time for voters to go work. I believe it's 2 hours.
It's not paid.
That is required to. Yes, I believe it is.
Meanwhile, Republican lawmakers in the Georgia legislature also appear interested in trying to find ways to implement parts of Trump's executive order on elections, which is tied up in the courts, is probably heading to the Supreme Court. But the point of the order was to get people like Representative Trey Kelly here to ask questions like this.
There's an open question as to the extent of the president's authority to issue executive orders regarding election equipment and the setting of election day. And ultimately, I think we're just going to have to wait and see what the Supreme Court, decides if these cases ever get up to it.
When we're talking about when we're in this issue where we're seeing where the courts are going, and I know you're the legal counsel, not necessarily our just policy guy, but what are other states doing to prepare to implement President Trump's executive order?
The executive order isn't law, but if states implement its demands and make those demands into state law, problem solved. All of this is leading up to what I'm calling a doomsday scenario that deals with certification of election results at the House of Representatives. You might remember some of this from last year when I reported on the dangerous scenario of certification of presidential election results. Now we're talking about certification of House races and contested elections and all this sort of stuff that I'm going to save for another time because it's a lot. But for now, just keep this in mind. Whether it's pardons by the DOJ demanding lists of voters and their personal information so they can construct a database of voters, the DOJ getting involved in bogus election denier-backed investigations into crazy fraud claims from 2020 or other elections, or governmental bodies like the Fulton County Election Board or the Georgia State Election Board or lots of other governmental bodies in states across the country. All of those things are aimed at the singular goal of ensuring that Republicans either can't lose elections again, or if they do, no one will believe it.